I make a lot of sourdough and I like to change up the type of bread that I make from week to week. So some weeks I'll do the round or oval artisan loaf. Sometimes I'll do a regular sandwich bread, everything bagel bread. For this week, I'm just gonna make one of my favorite sourdough sandwich breads. So this makes 2 loaves and it's actually a recipe that my brother introduced me to. The process is very similar to the one I used in the previous sourdough video that I made. So you basically mix up all the ingredients, do a bunch of stretch and folds, let it rise, shape it, let it rise again, and then bake. Except this time, instead of shaping it into the round or the oval loaves, I'm gonna shape it into sandwich loaves. So I'll leave the recipe that I'm using linked down in the description box, but it is almost 11 o'clock and I wanna get the dough started so that it has plenty of time to rise throughout the day. All right, like I said, this recipe makes 2 loaves, but if you don't want to make 2 loaves, you can easily just half everything and make 1 loaf. However, I always feel like if I'm going through the effort of making bread, I might as well just make 2 because it's not really any harder to make 2 and you're going to dirty everything anyway. You're getting all the ingredients out anyway, so you might as well end up with double the product. The only time I'll make 1 is if I'm trying a new recipe and I'm not sure how it's gonna turn out. I always like to start by mixing my water and my starter first, so I'm gonna do that. And I also always like to use warm water because I find that it helps get things going a little quicker. Okay, next is my starter. So I fed my starter last night. It's nice and bubbly this morning, so I'm just gonna put this in. And just like I said in my previous video, see how the starter is floating right on top of the water? That means it is ready to go, but I have made bread where the starter did not float on the top and it actually turned out fine. It just took a little bit longer to rise. But if your starter is floating on top like this, that is a good sign that it's nice and active. Now I'm gonna add everything else. So I will do the flour. You can use all-purpose flour or bread flour for this, or even a mix, but today I'm gonna use all bread flour. That's what I usually do. You need a lot of flour because you're making 2 loaves. And then oil, you can use whatever kind of oil you want. I am just using olive oil because it's what I have. It does kind of have a little bit of a stronger taste, but I don't mind that because I love olive oil. But you could use canola oil, vegetable oil. I've even used coconut oil, but today, olive oil. You probably could even use butter if you want. And then sugar or honey, I am gonna use honey. And then lastly, the salt. And just like with my other bread recipe for the artisan loaves, I start out mixing it with my silicone spatula. This is my favorite kitchen item that I own. I use it multiple times a day, every single day, without fail. I also always link everything that I'm using in the description. So if you're ever curious to buy any of this stuff or you just want to see what it is, you can go check out the description. So I'm mixing this first like this just to start incorporating it, and then I'll switch to my hands. You really want to make sure that you get all the way to the bottom because that's where all the water and the starter was. It will be a lot easier to mix with your hands if you get that mixed in. Okay, and then honestly, I don't like to mix it with this because it's annoying. So usually when I feel like it's good enough, I switch to my hands like as soon as possible, which is gonna be right now. So I wet my hands and now I'm just gonna mix it by grabbing part of the dough on the outside and pushing it into the middle, rotating the bowl. And I'm just gonna keep doing this until it feels not so wet. I mean, it's gonna be sticky. I'm also remembering because we were just coming out of winter where my house was cold and dry, and now it is very much the opposite. So my sourdough is reacting a lot differently than I'm used to. And I just kind of forgot that that happens, even though I've baked bread in the summer many times. I'm just kind of remembering now, like that the dough feels different, that it rises at a different rate. It's all a learning process. Don't freak out when you're doing this step and it seems like the dough is super wet and sticky. Once you let it rest for 30 minutes before the stretch and folds, it's going to feel much different. If I went to do a stretch and fold right now, that's what would happen. But once you let it rest, like I said, for 30 minutes, it gives time for the flour to soak up all the liquid and the starter that you put in. and it will be much easier to work with. So don't panic, don't think that you're doing anything wrong. Mine looks like this too. Look how sticky it is. It breaks right away. So I'm gonna cover it with a damp tea towel. I'm literally just taking a towel, wetting it and wringing it out in the sink, and then I'm gonna put it over here so that the dough doesn't dry out, and I will let it sit for 30 minutes and we'll come back and I'll show you how much different the dough is at that point. It's been 30 minutes, so now let's see what this dough feels like. I just wet my hands because it helps with the dough not sticking as much. And now I'm gonna do my first of 4 stretch and folds. So look at that. You can already see how different the dough is. It's still very wet, but it does not break when I lift it up. I can really stretch it. So I'm just gonna go around the whole bowl one full time and then cover this again. For this dough, you do a total of 4 rounds of stretch and folds, 1 every 30 minutes. So that was my first one. I'm gonna set another 30-minute timer and do this 3 more times over the next 2 hours. Time for the second stretch and fold. Time for the final stretch and fold. It's so fun to work with. And then, as with all my breads that require stretch and folds, on the last one, I just like to, I actually think this is called a coil fold, where you grab the dough from both sides of the middle and then sort of fold it over onto itself. I just do that like 2 or 3 times to encourage it into a ball shape, and I don't know if this is necessary, but it's just something that I like to do. And then here's where you have a couple options. So if you have enough time in your day to let this do its bulk rise, shape it, let it rise again, and then bake it all in the same day, you can do that. So I usually have very poor time management when it comes to timing out my sourdough, and if we were going to be home all day, I would be able to do this whole process in one day, but we're not. We have to go out later. So instead of letting this rise and then shaping it, letting it rise again and baking it today, I'm going to cover this with some plastic wrap, and I'm actually going to put this in the fridge, this whole bowl, just like this. And you can leave your dough in the fridge for a couple of days if you want. The longer you let it sit in the fridge, the more it's going to ferment and have more of that sour taste, which if you like that, you can put your dough in the fridge all the time just in order to get the taste and also the fermented benefits. For me today, I'm mostly doing this because of time. So it's still gonna rise in the fridge very slowly, but I don't really expect it to double in size like it would if I left it on the counter. So when I'm going to bake it on whatever day I end up getting to it, I will take the dough out and let it sit on the counter and come up to room temp, and kind of it will rise a little bit more that way. So I don't know if I'll have time to get to this tomorrow. I'm hoping that I will, but if I can't, it's fine to just keep leaving it in the fridge for another day or 2. So I have it covered. I'm gonna put the whole bowl in the fridge, and then the next time I come back, I will let it finish rising, do the shaping, let it rise again, and then bake it. It's the next day, and the second I got home from work today, I took the dough out of the fridge. I was not really sure how much it was gonna rise because sometimes in the fridge it does not really rise a lot, but this dough is ready. I'm not sure if you can see from there, but it's definitely grown a lot, and there are so many air bubbles underneath, which is exactly what we want. So I left it out. It's been out for about half an hour, 40 minutes. It's still a little cold, but I want it to have time to rise enough in the pans. I am impatient, and as we've already discussed, I sometimes don't have the best time management. We're gonna do it right now. We're doing it today. So I am going to split this in half because this makes 2 loaves. So I'll get it out of the bowl. I don't put flour on my counter really ever when I'm working with sourdough, although this recipe does say that you can lightly flour the counter. Wow, this is huge. I feel like this looks bigger than normal. Well, whatever. We're just gonna split it in half. Move 1/2 out of the way. Okay, so I'm gonna wet my hands a little bit because it helps the dough not stick. And I'm shaping these into sandwich loaves. So I'm first gonna get it into a rough rectangle. See how many air bubbles there are? That's what we're looking for. Then I'm gonna fold the top down, bottom up, this side in. If there's huge bubbles like this, sometimes I pop them. And then the other side in. You can use your bench scraper to help you get the dough up. Okay, then I'm gonna stitch it a little bit. I don't always do this, but I didn't really do a good job. And then I usually do turn it over and pull it like this on the counter a little bit. See this huge air bubble? I'm gonna pop it. Then I will tuck the sides in. And I really should have sprayed this before I started working with the dough, but here we are. And then I'll just transfer it into here. And I kind of press it down a little bit so that it fills the whole pan. And again, I'm just breaking any big air bubbles. All right, I'm gonna leave that like that, and then I'll do the other one. Learned from my mistake. I'll spray this first. Sometimes I also, instead of folding this side up, I just roll it, but this dough is pretty sticky today, probably because it's so warm in here. Now that these are in here, I'm going to cover them with some plastic wrap, which I will just first lay out on the counter and spray it with a little bit of my avocado oil spray, because these are gonna rise up over the edges of the pan and it's sticky dough, like I said. So I'm just gonna spray the plastic wrap so that it doesn't get completely stuck on here. And now I will cover these. You could also use a damp towel, but sometimes the towel gets stuck, so I just like to use this. So now I'll let this rise for another few hours until it's starting to come up over the edges of the pan, and then we'll bake it. I think this loaf might have a little bit more dough in it than this one. Either that or I shaped it a little bit better. Oh well, either way, it's gonna be fine. Both loaves are gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be fine. So this loaf is just about as risen as I wanna let it get. This one still has to go a little bit longer, but I don't really wanna wait on this, so I might start to get the oven ready so I can get this one in. And then I'll just put this in a little bit when it's ready. So you do have to do a little bit of something special when you bake these, so I'll show you what I do. You really want to create steam in the oven because the bread rises and does really well in a steamy environment. So before you preheat your oven, you want to configure the rack so that you have one on the bottom and one in the middle. And I'm putting a baking tray with water on the bottom rack and a pizza stone in the middle. And then I'm preheating the oven to 400, and when the dough is ready to go in, I spray the top with water, and then I put it in right on top of the pizza stone. And I'm going to bake this first for 15 minutes. Once the 15 minutes is up, I am very, very carefully taking the tray of water out. And then I'll continue to bake this for another 15 to 20 minutes. Now, if your bread is not done in the middle, but the top is getting too brown, you can tent the dough, which just means putting a piece of tinfoil over the top and continuing to bake until it's baked through. If you're not sure when your dough is baked through, you can check it with a thermometer, and when it reaches 200 degrees Fahrenheit, it is done. Once the dough is fully cooled, I'm slicing into it to show you what it looks like on the inside. This bread toasted with butter or butter and jam is just so, so good. So I hope you give it a try, and I'll see you in my next video.